To follow the Minister and quite timely, given that the issues that I wish to focus on also sit around unemployment. We'll touch on youth unemployment as well. But I did just want to point out that the Minister said at the beginning of her speech that she wasn't playing politics, implied that Labour was, and then went on to say that we didn't have enough love for the people that we're here to represent. And I really... I am going to summarise what the Minister said, because that was certainly what was implied. And all I want to point out to the Minister is that if that's not playing politics, then I don't know what is. I also just wanted to point out a couple of issues that I have with quoting some of the statistics she has around young people going into WINS offices and not moving on to benefits. Young people, of course, don't become eligible for an unemployment benefit till 18, and as we know, the NEET figures in New Zealand, which I'm happy to go through later on in my speech, are incredibly high, and a number of the young people who will be presenting to WINS won't be eligible because the government's also made it very hard to go on to an independent youth benefit, the only other thing that they would in fact be eligible for. And I've also heard anecdotal evidence of young people being told that they won't be put onto a benefit even if they are 18 unless they go onto a limited service volunteer program, even if it is several hours away from where they live. And they see that as a barrier for them getting further support. So there are issues with just quoting statistics willy-nilly. If the Minister's happy to provide more evidence, I'd be happy to see it. But in the Prime Minister's speech yesterday, I think all of us were looking for a vision, for some hope and for a plan. Now, the Minister may claim that Labour is scaremongering. What scaremongering is there in asking the Prime Minister to present a plan for how we're going to stimulate the economy and grow jobs for Kiwis? That is not scaremongering. That is the responsibility of us as the opposition. Where the fear comes in is when there is a blank answer from the government as to what their plan is. That is scary. That is absolutely frightening, that after 2 years of recession, that the government still does not have a plan to bring us out and to start creating jobs for the 6.8% of Kiwis who are currently unemployed. And that is not just a statistic. On the 3rd of February, when we found out that unemployment had increased, that represented 158,000 Kiwis currently unemployed. That is 52,000 more than when the government took office. And we know, as we always do, that with these kinds of figures there will always be some who are overrepresented in the statistics, and in this case it's young people. 25% of 15 to 19-year-olds looking for work. 25%. The last time it was that high was decades ago. And I also want to point out that the last time it was that high, we had a youth minimum wage. That's a message for the ACT Party. Stop trying to bring back policies of the past that did not work. It did not work, Ms. Roy. The last time youth unemployment was that high was when we had a youth minimum wage. There is no robust evidence to suggest a correlation between lowering unemployment and giving them a lower wage for the same job as an adult. And what about the NEET figures? 34,000 15 to 19-year-olds not in employment, education or training. 34,000. That is the figure that frightens me, because whilst the Minister is content to talk about unemployment benefit numbers, that does not include those young people. Predominantly those young people in that category are not having any contact with the government services, training, education, anything that is going to give them a long-term future, and those are the young people we should be most concerned about. And in the 20 to 24-year-old range, 11.2% unemployed according to the latest Household Labour Force survey. 39,000 NEETs in that category. Now these represent a group of young people who are often coming out of training or education and have failed to find work. Again, the longer that those young people are unemployed, the more difficult it becomes for them to find work. That should have been the issue that the Minister addressed in her statement today when she told Parliament and New Zealand that there are an extra 1,000 people drawing benefits. She should have given us a plan. And if she didn't give us a plan, the Prime Minister should have given us a plan, and we've heard nothing from either of them. Instead, we've heard excuses. And the 5 times that the Prime Minister mentioned employment in his speech, once was in reference to employment for people who are in prison, once was in terms of employment law and removing people's employment rights as a apparent way to get them into work. So that leaves 3 times. And in those 3 times, did we actually hear anything concrete? Well, across the range of statements we'd heard from Paula Bennett and from the Prime Minister about unemployment figures, we've heard statements about how the figures are volatile. We've heard statements about how there aren't enough jobs. We've heard statements from Minister Bennett about how job seekers just need to keep a positive attitude. Kiwis don't want to be told that their attitude needs to change in order to find work. They need to be told there are jobs. Because they are looking, and we know they are looking, but if the jobs aren't there, it's a futile exercise. Now, Labor has always said that there are things that can be done to stimulate the economy in order to create employment. And we've talked about a systematic change to the way the government intervenes in the economy. Now, of course, this falls on deaf ears because ideologically we perceive these things very differently. We've asked the government for a plan around economic growth, and instead, what have we seen? What have we seen from the government? Well, I'm willing to acknowledge that job ops was something they threw up very early on. This was, so far, has been almost the entirety of their plan was job ops. The New Zealand Institute for Economic Research gave the government a C on youth unemployment, saying that job ops at best was going to hit about 8% of young people who are in need of work, 8%. And of those who were affected by this scheme, most of those jobs have turned out to be short-term because they were in short-term incentives for employers to be subsidised to take on young people. They weren't necessarily long-term jobs that would exist beyond 6 months. So that was essentially what we've seen from the government in terms of a plan, job ops. Beyond that, very little else. Well, what about in the second area that they could have contributed, skills and education? Well, instead of investing in skills and education, as the Australian government has, and has unemployment at a level of 5%, last time we saw a level of 5% was when the government decided to have its job summit. And since then, we've been hurtling towards higher unemployment. So obviously, unfortunately, it hasn't had the outcome that was obviously intended. So instead of investing in skills and education, what have we seen? Well, essentially, in real terms, cuts to tertiary education. Less funding, so that actually universities are now unable to provide the number of placements to meet the demand amongst young people. They've also made it difficult to stay in tertiary education by tightening up student loan requirements, and they have essentially cut 50 million out of skills and trade training, the exact opposite of what most sensible governments have done in the face of a recession and in the face of unemployment. And what about on job creation? We saw the 9-day fortnight, but that was a preventative. It was nothing to do with creating work. So the one thing we're left with at the end of the day is the cycle way. Labor never said it was a bad idea, but we said if it's your only idea, it's a shocker, because it's created about 200 jobs. And when you have 158,000 people out of work, then that is not a plan. 200 jobs is not a plan. 90 days, I'm happy to come back to. There's much more to be said on that. But as an alternative, Labor has said all along, we must make systemic change. We need a government who's going to take an active role in the economy through monetary policy. It's not enough to talk about trade deals if your exporters are struggling to deal with our volatile New Zealand dollar. It's about a fairer tax system. It's about bringing back incentives for research and development rather than cutting 620 million out of tax credits, 700 mil out of the Fast Forward Fund. PwC has told us there are billions to be made in clean tech if only New Zealand would capitalise on that opportunity. And if there aren't jobs there, then where are they? Skills and trade training. Labor's always had a plan for youth transition. It's just a shame the government came in and cut it. We've also said we need to invest in apprenticeships, and we need to deal with those 70,000 young people who aren't in employment, education or training. But instead of hearing a plan for the government, we've heard the consequences of not having a plan. Just this afternoon, 1,000 more people joining the dole queue. Enough is enough.
Order.
If Kiwis want a plan, it's Labour that will deliver it.
Yeah.